Good afternoon, or at least to me it's good afternoon. Maybe to you it's good morning or even later. It's a Friday afternoon for me, and we just had an opening last night actually of quite a big project. So I'm a bit tired and wrecked and ready for weekends. So I hope I can still make a sort of vivid impression in this presentation, and if not, then apologies. It was postponed due to Corona regulations and postponements and yeah, a lot of things. So it came a little bit closer to one another than I expected. I think I'm gonna start straight away with a picture. This is the location I want to speak about. As being said, I'm a curator here of this terrain. Yeah, you mostly see the terrain from the water and then behind the warehouses. That's the location. It's the east side of a former ship wharf. It's about 10,000 square meters. It's in the north of Amsterdam. Yeah, that's what we're at right now. And you pronounced it right, Stichting NDSM Werf. And I want to say something briefly about the historical references, because that's quite, I think, important to know. So the history of the NDSM shipyard goes back to 1894. In that year, the Nederlandse Scheepsbouwmaatschappij was founded in the east part of Amsterdam, on the same location where a few centuries earlier VOC ships were built. The aim of founding this shipyard was to kickstart the shipbuilding industry by building modern iron ships with mechanical propulsion. And the company was very successful and grew rapidly. And due to a lack of expansion possibilities, the NSM had to look for another location. And in 1915, this was found on the other side of the I, in Amsterdam North. I will show you a picture of the city map to get a clearer view on that. In 1920, the Nederlandse Dokmaatschappij, which was another company, also found its niche on the I-bank on the adjacent site. And after the Second World War, the companies decided to merge. So in 1946, the Nederlandse Dok- en Scheepsbouwmaatschappij, so the NDSM in short, was founded. And at that time, there was a great need for replacement of older ships and transport to and from the Dutch East Indies. And in addition, the economy was growing, which meant that the transport of goods and passengers also increased enormously. And the NDSM was seen worldwide as a very successful and progressive company in the shipping world, regularly launching huge, impressive cargo ships, passenger ships and oil tankers. And I can show you here also a few other pictures of that. Went from the slipways between the 20s and the 80s. And in 1950, it was even the largest shipyard in Europe. And it was one of the largest and most modern shipbuilding yards in the world. They even invented the underwater welding. When it was too big to do that on site, they had to bring it in the water, the parts, and then weld it together. A company where many innovations were conceived that are still applied today in shipbuilding and ship repair. But in the 70s, the NDSM gets into trouble because of the oil crisis, political games, and competition because of the companies in the East. And in 1984, it closes its doors. And of course, today you cannot only tell the success stories without mentioning the consequences of the industry for the environment. The ground here is still very polluted. Lots of migrant workers, mainly from Turkey, were working at the yards, had to work really long days, also on weekends. Consequences, of course, of the oil tankers and ships and their activities for other countries, and the devastation after the bankruptcy for the employees. So, of course, there were a lot of consequences to many people, countries, lands. Here you can see one picture of what is still part of the NDSM, but about 1 kilometer further. There's still Damen, who's been there for 100 years now and does only ship repair. But this is like a really recent picture, so they're still in business, but also that is being threatened by development, and that they want to create new living spaces there. Here you can see the location of the NDSM in relation to the central station, and that the city center was all built on the south side of the A bank. Only the small parts opposing the central station was sort of annexated, called Volewijk. And Amsterdam expanded to the north at the end of the 19th century. Industry causing trouble in the center and in the east, mostly, but also other parts. There was not enough space there. They moved to the north and settled all along the I-bank. So like Shell, for instance, the big oil company, they also had their offices, and also the Fokker ship, the air company was also located there. And employees needed housing, and with the idea of the garden cities in England in mind, there was a new concept. This was copied to the Netherlands, but of course the Netherlands is way smaller than cities in England. So it became from garden cities, it became garden villages. So there were actually a couple of smaller villages like Tuindorp Ozaan you have here, that housed like lots of employees working at NDSM Wharf at the time. So you could actually walk to your work or go there by bike. These villages had low housing, a square with facilities, and a lot of green space. So bigger and greener compared to the older housing along the canals in Amsterdam. So here you can see, wait up, just need to do this a little bit. So NDSM Yard East, that's the part where we are located and also taken care of, was a creative spot since the 80s. Artists who used to work in temporary warehouses at the other side of Amsterdam got expelled and turned, among other places, to NDSM. And at the time, the North was quiet, not hip yet. This place was really, for a lot of drugs dealers, it was a rough time for some time. And one of the first companies who came to NDSM was MTV, but they already started complaining about the graffiti tags on the buildings. And then some warehouses got sold, and others were still in the position of and in the ownership of the city council. So a lot went to one project developer, and he also bought a lot of grounds on the west sides of NDSM. And he promotes, or they promote, all the expensive large loft apartments overlooking the water and the ones behind it with the creative vibe. You can also see it if you find it interesting. Leven op ndsm.nl is the URL. In the 80s, there also were quite some creative companies coming to NDSM. And one of them was Dochtroep, which was location theater. So they really made use of the location and made site-specific theater. So that was really spectacular. And another sort of important, spectacular, historical, cultural heritage thing was Robodoc, which was this multidisciplinary festival, basically for robotics, fire, a lot of spectacles, and coming from the squatting community. There are some warehouses. So you had one where the welding took place, for instance. This you see in the background is called the NDSM Loods. And this is the one where about 250 artists are located. So now there's quite a mixture on the terrain of commercial and private and cultural partners. So Greenpeace, there's the Hilton Hotel, there's MTV, there's one, I think I've got a picture of it later on, that's owned by the project developer, but now a private initiative is actually turned it into a street art museum, which is now a private museum as well. And yeah, who knows what the future is going to bring. Here you see the inside of the kunstloods, the NDSM loads. So artists, they've got a 50-year rental contract, and it has a separate foundation taking care of the whole building and also the artist, called Stichting Kinetisch Noord. And the plan at the time was to build sort of streets and Costco studios, so they can actually build their own studio. So it's really like an art city. And there's now like a NDSM theater as well, and a commercial restaurant part of it, and a small exhibition space called NDSM Fuse. Here the pink parts are actually the places where a lot of new built housing is going to be developed or is already recently developed. So you see that NDSM, where it used to be more of a you call it in Dutch a rafelrand, sort of the edge of the city, it more and more becomes part of the inner center, basically, of a lot of new urban activities and trendiness as well. Here at the bottom, you can see now parts of the high-rise buildings, and that's actually the blue part that you see at the top image. So in the end, almost everything is going to be built over there with high-rise apartment buildings, but also schools and some shops. The green is the parts that we are at, and the red part needs to be developed also in the coming years. And on the right bottom side, you see the bottom of the street art museum, and at the top there's still the advertisements for from the project developer. And so they make now this advertisement for Leven op NDSM, living at NDSM. So really using also this cultural vibe. I really have trouble with, sorry, this. So we, with the foundation, it was founded in 2010, and we direct, initiate, curate, connect, stimulate cultural programs, but also try to do more with urban sports. And we host festivals and different events ranging from really small scale cultural programming to bigger really dance festivals that we all take into the cultural programming again. So that's part of our finances. Our founding partners are the Amsterdam municipality, the project developer Bos, who's owning now huge amounts of on the other side, but also the street art museum, and the artists. We do have an independent governance structure and independent boards, and the city council commissions the foundation to program and take care of the terrain. And now the contract is at least until 2024. And after that, we need to see still. And we get funding by the AFK, which is the local art fund for the art programming. The functions on NDSM, it's basically like an ecosystem for art and culture. And so we program and curate a 10-acre of public space for diverse usage and rental. On the same terrain, there are several art initiatives with a temporary rental contracts. And there are several temporary incubators, like Treehouse, which is this new artist studio collective, with also a small presentation function that can stay here for like 10 years. And MACA, Moving Art Center Amsterdam, which also got a rental contract now for 10 years. And we, for instance, took Sexyland to the terrain, which was also this temporary cultural initiative. And they wanted to actually expand on the terrain, but then they could only get like a temporary rental contract from the city council for 5 years. And in the end, it was not possible for them to stay and to, because the 5 year is difficult to really make the investors ready to invest all the money in new temporary housing for only 5 years. So until 2028, there is this conservative destination plan. So no new urban development is going to take place here on the east parts. But the heavy developments on the west side and the north side, and the other side, you have the Buiksloterham, which also increase like massively with urban developments. So where it used to be like really enclosed by free and open space, all the habitation comes close by. And we also need to see how much noise is still possible from the festivals, for instance. So yeah, what does this mean in terms of limitations of what we can do, but also in the future permanent temporary status? What will happen? Although, I mean, we do feel that the demand for open and cultural and public space is even bigger now. So on that side, we are pretty protected, we feel, in a way, that there's also a big need for this open space. But the consequences are quite unclear, and also the status is really precarious. It could change like after 2028. So it is still being considered as a free and experimental zone, but in order to keep it that way for more people, we need to have boundaries and rules or principles. We act as initiators, but also as community managers, directors of urban space, in order to generate a polyphonic audience. That's really what we are aiming for. And programming, we need to invite also outside parties and different partners to make it public. And in Dutch, you also have a difference in wording and terming. You have openbare ruimte and public space, publieke ruimte. And we really deliberately want to make it more public, so for a wider audience, and to create also new connections between the old inhabitants and the new inhabitants, and to allow for a polyphony of voices where everybody could and should be heard, or could feel welcome or welcomed. And in the general city council public space, it's more like, okay, who has the strongest voice and who knows like the roads to the regulation and to the offices. So we have these 8 principles. With the history in mind, and together with the NDSM community, we came up to these principles. So leave no trace or leave it better, radical inclusion, co-creation, public character, participation. The NDSM is ours. Together we're using the terrain for the collective goal. No extraction. So if you want to take something, you also have to leave something, and be responsible. But you also feel that on the one hand, there are a lot of people who really try to embrace this, but also when sort of the future is at stake, it's also hard to maintain these principles. So the question remains how to become and remain an experimental, sustainable public space that meets demands of both the old inhabitants, the new inhabitants, visitors, tourists, a diverse audience that is open, dispersed, and layered. And we try to keep Nina Simone in mind, who with of by for all claims that accessibility does not mean losing quality, which is often also from a sort of cultural standpoint is being used as an argument that it's not worth or not good. And because we became like this urban or becoming this urban central location, it also means new and updated responsibilities. From a cultural point of view, we do have two important themes that we want to work with, which is the sense of place. So what was the place, what is it now, and what can it become, and how to really sort of make that more visible instead of just an empty, vast space. And this sense of people, this idea of collectivity and polyphony, and the old and the new. And beside that, in more festival terrain approach, we want to become like really the most sustainable and to be the most public, to try to have not as much fences where possible. But of course, we're also bound and restricted a little bit because we need the financials on that side. So it's a bit pushing and there. So it is a vast empty space, but also at times large dance festivals take place, like Digital, the Amsterdam Dance Events. There's every month in summer a large secondhand market. There's a smaller theater festival over at IJ. There's art programming by us or by the NDSM community. We also invited a street basketball company called 3x3 Unites, and they've got also a leadership program to really try to get young people through street basketball further in society. There's also alternative circus or gardening for inhabitants. So we really try to create a sort of full-scale 360 programming. You see they also did like a tournament last summer, and it's really working in bringing also new audiences to NDSM without it being really a festival. Well, here are a couple of examples of artworks. These are a container arch that was installed here by a festival a couple of years ago. But during Corona, when there was no festival happening at all, we commissioned designers at NDSM to make a design. And they used this abstract lettering and wrote "Be kind." And on the side, there's a harlequin, and the other side has an owl, sort of the funny, and the wise, and the festive. These neons are here also to sort of remind us that it shouldn't become like an elitopia. So this artist really used the self-centered ideas of current society and put them together. So the elite and the utopia. And so she used like 4 different words: climate globality, narcissism, and introspeculation. And this behind it is the tree house, the new sort of incubator, which has a temporary leash for almost 8 years now. This was, for instance, the outcome of the NDSM Open. So we have this open call for artists, and they can send in proposals. And he is like a toy designer and made these sort of playful sculptures that you can also hang onto. They're life size. This was a project we did last year during ADA when there was no festival happening, and we commissioned 2 artists to make a site-specific project. And one of them was Boris Arquette, and he made like a beacon. It was like a lighthouse, really radiating and also pulsating in sounds. Yeah, like a sort of in honor of the festival scene and the music scene. This is a project we started this year next to our office and also next to a sort of public beach, but is being privatized basically by a restaurant. So you really, if you're there, don't feel welcome to just sit there. And so we asked artists to come up with this, and they made a really nice project out of this for a few months and do some live programming. And it's really like a diverse audience every weekend again. Also with kids coming, they do like educational programming. This is a project we launched last night, the Tower of Babel, which is a concept by Guido van der Werve, and he actually took the original idea of the Tower of Babel, but instead of having just one kind of people, he actually was wondering what Amsterdam, with all the different nationalities, would build. So we had design studios with a couple of architects. In the end, they came up with this. So it was sort of shared designing with something that could still be finished. So it could potentially be built higher. It has like these sort of concrete fragments that we turned into benches, but also looks like, oh yeah, maybe it's also the end of sort of civilization. And we asked like 8 different artists to host workshops. And they worked all with different communities to ask basically what their ideal city would look like. So with street basketballers, the flags were made. Well, bricks were built. We will have like an audio installation where different people tell their stories about what it actually means to feel at home. With refugees, there was a new iced tea made, a sort of blend of all the different nationalities of the people in this refugee center. So it will be filled in the next couple of weeks. So here you see a few more. Now we are actually at the position that the City Council, the Alderwoman of Housing and Greenery, demanded a feasibility study for greenery at NDSM. So what could be in percentages the way it could be made greener next to the industrial heritage. So the slopeways, for instance, cannot be made green any further. But of course, there's a lot of terrain that can be greened. And within this temporary status, because of course it takes some time before anything will be decided by the City Council, we came up with a playbook, and you can look at it when you go to the website ndsm.nl/playbook. And in collaboration with a lot of partners, we came up with ideas and suggestions. And we want to see what is possible within the next 3 years to do on a sort of temporary state with smaller scale, creative, cultural elements to see what we can do actually from our sort of creative power, basically. And the question now, of course, will be like, will this bring the temporary state to an end or not? So, of course, you can do a lot with this combination of innovation, creativity, and really merge like this industrial heritage and creativity with a public pool or urban sports. So here you see, for instance, a sketch of also like this street basketball, which they consider green as well, that you can also use as a canvas for artists, for instance, or that you can also program. You can also extend it, of course, underwater. Well, we have some examples in this playbook, and we still need to see how to proceed with that. But there are a few spots on the terrain that we can start, and one is a former spot where the Sexyland initiative was housed for a few years, and that has been demolished right now. And we asked Afina de Jong to see, from a sort of social architecture designing approach, what it can be, like in greening or in a green entrance, a creative space. We're also going to do like a artistic playground in combination with the NDSM community, plus a green wall for sound prevention. We're working on sustainable toilets that can also be used for the festival, and where the pee and the poo are being divided and can be used to grow trees. And we're also looking at a more sort of semi-permanent stage, perhaps at the slope, that could be used. So these are actually the new challenges that we're facing right now. The future status of the NDSM East, will it still be like a cultural space, or will it be like a more static urban park where you can still host a few things? So the future status is really not so clear, even though I don't think they're considering to make it into housing. But what and how with the greening, and how creative it can be, or how much ownership we can still have with the artists over it, that's still a question. Also, there are a couple of cultural temporary initiatives who might need to be replaced by green. So it's also kind of strange to think of, will green then be a friend and a possible thing, element to create new creativity, or will it actually be a foe? Because it could be an interesting mixture, but the way is, of course, really important, how it should be done. And will there be enough free space or enough dynamic, or will it be much more of a monocultural, static park, basically? So this, I think, was it.